Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making this a full house, and thank you for spending your Friday lunchtime with us. My name is Carol Soon. I'm Principal Research Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies. That is a think tank that's part of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Now, the topic for today's lunchtime dialogue is AI and governance in a time of disinformation. But before I introduce my panelists, just indulge me a little as I track back a little bit into a memory lane. Now, when I started my journey as a researcher in media and technology, which was about 20 years ago, the world was in a very, very different time. We were in the age of what we called Web 1.0. And Web 1.0 was really characterized by HTML and websites, for those of you in the room who remember that. And within a short span of about 5 years, Web 1.0 gave way to Web 2.0. And in Web 2.0, we saw the proliferation of user-generated content like blogs and peer-to-peer sharing sites. So the shift was significant because it meant that the power to create and produce no longer resided with those who had the technical expertise to create or those with the financial power to pay for creation. So why am I talking about Web 1.0 and Web 2.0 when we are supposed to be talking about something a lot more exciting like AI? Now, it is because we are seeing the same developments and shifts with AI. Now, AI is not new. Research and development work in AI has taken place since the 1960s. So some of you might have heard of ELIZA. ELIZA is an AI chatbot that is powered by natural language processing and was developed in the mid-1960s. So early AI models were limited to scientific and proprietary usage, but today, rapid developments in AI made possible by the immensely large data sets that we are surrounded by have mainstreamed access and mainstream use to AI technology. And in the past 20 months, we have seen the deployment of AI in different domains, politics, business, creative media and media industries, education, and work. So with increasingly widespread adoption of AI technology by institutions and individuals, we are seeing benefits, but we're also witnessing some of the pitfalls and problems arising from the innovation and deployment of AI. And they include, but are not limited to, say, problems of bias, exclusion, disinformation, and also threats to elections and democracy. So together with my 4 esteemed panelists this afternoon, I hope that this panel would do 3 things. Number 1, we hope to unpack the complexities and the complications behind the governance of AI and really interrogate the role different stakeholders play in AI governance. Number 2, we hope that this panel will generate insights and recommendations for policymakers, businesses, perhaps even civil society and yourselves, on the way forward in maximizing the benefits of AI while mitigating its pitfalls. Third and finally, I hope that this panel will invigorate our thinking on how different stakeholders can work better together to achieve these goals. So let me briefly introduce my speakers. I won't, rattle off their very long and established CV. The information is all up there. I have with us today Dr. Janil Puthucheary, who is Senior Minister of State at the Ministry of Digital Development and Information. Dr. Janil is also concurrently Senior Minister of State at MOH. Now at MDDI, he steers the Singapore Smart Nation Strategy and Government Digitalization Initiatives. Dr. Janil is also Minister in charge of the Government Technology Agency. Then I also have with me Ms. Sandy Kunvatanagan, Head of Policy APAC at OpenAI. Sandy is also Advisory Board Member for the University of Pittsburgh School of Law Center for International Legal Education. Now, before joining OpenAI, she was the Head of Global Strategy at Meta's Reality Labs Policy. Then I have also Mr. Jamie Ho, Editor of the Straits Times at SPH Media. So I think Jamie is very familiar to all of us. At the Straits Times, he oversees the newsroom's growth and operations. And before joining SPH Media Group in 2022, he spent 25 over years in journalism and the Singapore Civil Service. And finally, but not least important, we have Ms. Eunice Huang. She's head of AI and emerging tech policy at APAC Google. So at Google, Eunice works with key stakeholders like governments on the responsible development and deployment of AI. Prior to her current role at Google, she led their digital trade efforts in APAC. So this is how we would do this 1 hour session. We don't have a lot of time, and we do want to give you some time because I'm quite sure you have a lot of questions and comments for my panelists. So we'll first start with each of them making some opening remarks, and then after that, we will go into questions and answer with all of you. This session is recorded and live streamed, so when you ask your questions or when you make your remarks, please speak directly into the microphone. So Dr. Janil, my first question is to you. Now, the Singapore government has been regulating the development and application of AI systems since, I think, 2018 thereabouts, through voluntary frameworks and guidelines like the Model AI Governance Framework. Now, it has also spearheaded different initiatives like the AI Verify Toolkit. Now, the AI technology is moving very, very rapidly, and we obviously are beginning to see its impact in different realms of our lives. What do you see are some of the key, perhaps understated benefits that the technology brings to society, and what would you say defines Singapore's approach to governing the technology?
Thank you, Carol, and thank you all very much for inviting me to join you here today. Our approach towards governing this technological shift and the potential wave of disruption as a result of AI, in some ways is not so different from our approach to any previous wave of technologically based disruption that we have faced or that we are likely to face in the future. And we have an imperative to make sure that Singapore's people, our economy, our businesses, the jobs, the social cohesion and structure that we have are able to benefit from whatever technological disruption is coming towards us. And that has required a certain mindset, a mindset of reinvention. So several times over the last now nearly 6 decades, we've had to go through some sense of reinvention. And with AI, it's no different. We will need to reinvent some of our education, some of our aspirations, some of the opportunity creation within the economy, and also what people see as the personal development path that they undertake. So some of that, no different, and I can talk a little bit about how some of the tools and mechanisms and platforms that we have used in the past continue to be relevant today. Some things are different. One is the extent to which today our economy and our country is already heavily reliant on technology, and specifically information technology. And so this particular wave of disruption affects what is a bedrock, a foundational piece for so much of what our economy is already able to achieve today. Secondly, we are today in Singapore highly connected, and that high degree of connectivity is not just about the extent that we have subsea cables and internet connectivity and telco interoperability, but a connection around ideas that our institutions, our policies, our operational functions, whether it's about our ports, whether it's about our cybersecurity standards, whether it's how we do invoicing and bills of lading, we're incredibly connected with the world. You deploy a product in Silicon Valley in the middle of Europe, chances are you can deploy it the next day in Singapore, and you see that happening in many instances. And so whatever is happening in the AI space around the rest of the world will impact us in real time. So those are two shifts that we have to think about, which are different from a previous wave of technological disruption. One other consideration is, of course, that the AI revolution is really not cooked yet. Depending on where you believe that we are on the Gartner hype cycle, and we have colleagues who might have different views, but it isn't cooked, and we need to be able to develop our approach in real time as the promise, as well as the pitfalls of AI play out in the world around us. What does that mean about our government response? Well, Carol, you mentioned already some of the things that we have done. model frameworks, testing kits, taking positions about whether we have global laws or sector-specific laws. But there are some core components. The first is public trust and accountability. Whichever wave of technology we are dealing with, whichever pressure of disruption we're dealing with, we have to have, first and foremost, a sense that our response has to shore up and strengthen public trust and accountability. Otherwise, we won't be able to take the second or third step in terms of deployment, execution, and bringing our public along. The second is that as government, we need significant expertise. We cannot be in the mindset of late adopters or even fast followers. We need technical expertise within government to be able to understand what is needed from us in the regulatory space and to start considering our legislative and regulatory position a little bit ahead of demand. And again, this is not new to AI. We've had to do this, whether it's aviation, whether it's trade, finance, and so forth. That bringing in of technical expertise within government, and we have to do the same for artificial intelligence and digitization. The third response is then an aggressive process of helping our people and our businesses reinvent themselves. So leveraging on things like Skills Future, Adult Learning, Tech Skills Accelerator, active components of developing the educational capability, providing the grant and subsidies, as well as the incentives for people to go along and take the courses, develop the skills, and businesses to retool and reinvent themselves, matching them up with solutions through, for example, SMEs Go Digital, our Digital Enterprise Blueprint, all of the details available through a QR code I might share later on, but I won't expound at great length. And then we then have to be a little bit judicious about what it is we directly do as government. And specific to AI, let me talk a little bit about some of the components we are doing and some of the components we're not doing. We're not coming up with a global universal AI legislation, for example. Our legislative approach is targeted and specific. When you talk about misinformation, disinformation, deepfakes, each of our legislative pieces is going after a specific challenge, a specific operational issue, dealing with it, learning with it, informing our next bound. And in parallel, we're requiring AI and technology-based assessments to be then embedded within the licensing and regulatory framework for each domain. So simplistically, we don't have a global AI regulation, but if you deploy an AI technology within healthcare, it has to meet the healthcare-specific licensing and regulation processes and be tested against the standards that already exist within that space. Then we have, and we need to make sure that we pay attention to the layers of our capability that are not necessarily AI-specific, but make possible the deployment and development of these technologies here in Singapore. For example, our telco connectivity, our subsea cable connectivity, our data centers, our access to compute, our access to energy and then green energy. All this we've talked about in our digital connectivity blueprint, our green data center blueprint. We've launched these ideas, but these are the enablers to make sure that companies working on AI come here, researchers working on AI are able to develop their efforts here, and then deployment becomes possible here in Singapore, creating the environment and the infrastructure and the capability. Third, or fourth, I've lost track of my bullet points, is talent development. And like every other significant shift in our society, we will have to pay a lot of attention to developing our talent. We've explained that we want to triple the number of AI practitioners. Over the last few years, we've significantly increased the undergraduate pipeline, but we are paying attention now to what's happening in the postgraduate space, fellowships, professorships, grants, the ability for people to bring researchers and do their work here. And then lastly, what do we do as government? Model governance frameworks, AI verified toolkits, but very importantly, what we need to do and need to keep doing is be present at a whole variety of international fora, work through the multilateral institutions, and advocate for a series of standards and positions around data, around cybersecurity, intellectual property protection, and the type of embedding of AI-based and technology-based solutions within a whole bunch of other bilateral and multilateral instruments. And we can play our part to hold up a certain set of values and positions, makes us a valuable partner to a wide variety of international stakeholders. That has allowed us a seat at the table. And so then today, for example, the UNH Lab recommendations, we've had significant participation in that, and then we can continue to be a valued player on the international stage. So, Whistle Stop Pen Sketch Tour, it's one of those, I don't have a TLDR version. It's something that I spend a lot of time dreaming and thinking about. It's a more hold my beer moment, so I'll try very hard to stop there and hand on to some of my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Janil. Thank you for sharing with us the government's, quite holistic and wide-ranging policy toolbox, right? Not just looking at regulation, and even when we talk about regulation, it's not always just laws, but frameworks, codes of practice, etc., and also the programming interventions and advocacy work. You also touched on what Singapore is not just doing domestically, but on a bilateral and multilateral basis as well. Now, Sandy, just like to bring the conversation to you. Now, when ChatGPT was launched in late 2022, it created a huge buzz surrounding AI. It very quickly prompted companies to actively harness AI and to integrate the technology in their products and services. Some have also said that the launch of ChatGPT have kind of started an AI arms race, right? And since then, there have been many hopes as well as many fears being expressed around AI technology in general. Now, the innovation cycle when it comes to tech is generally short. But with AI, it seems within the last 20 months, not just what's happening with Open AI, but also other companies like Google, the innovation cycle seems to be even shorter. So can you tell us a little bit about OpenAI's approach to, say, technological innovation and deployment?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everybody. Thanks for spending your Friday afternoon lunchtime with us. I can absolutely talk a little bit about the innovation hype cycle since ChatGPT, but what I actually would love to start with is taking us a little bit back, much like how you did, because AI didn't start with ChatGPT. We built on the backs of learning and innovation from tons of people that have been happening for decades, because breakthroughs in this field have been happening for quite a long time. And it wasn't even that long ago when people were skeptical that artificial general intelligence would even be possible. And when we were founded in 2015, people then were very skeptical that our mission was something that would be possible. Obviously, our founders they weren't skeptical. They were all in, and they very much believe that we could achieve the mission of pushing forward the frontier of this technology in a way that could benefit as many people as possible. But to your statement earlier about, are we cooking yet? I think we're actually in the recipe formation stage. I think we're still quite early, and we have a long way to go on this journey. And all the innovations that have come so far, we're going to future companies, future you guys someday may build on all of that and help us get to the next leap. I mean, when ChatGPT was launched, the morning that it went out, very honestly, the company thought it wasn't going to be a big deal. There was actually a Slack screenshot that we send around inside the company sometimes to remind us of this, because that Slack screenshot says in it, basically, hey, this is going to be quiet, just FYI, it's going to happen, not a big deal, all good. And clearly we were very wrong about that, but it is just a reminder to us that we don't know when the next innovation breakthrough is going to come from or where it's going to come from. And that's quite exciting, because ChatGPT really ushered in this whole new wave of enthusiasm, innovation, really excitement about what is possible at the edge of this field. And then last week, when we launched our latest model, O1, which if you haven't played with it yet, it's available on ChatGPT Plus for all users. You can play with it now. What's really innovative about this, and why we think it's a real fundamental paradigm shift, is the fact that this model can now reason. And so what that means is that it can try out new strategies, it can recognize its own mistakes, and then it can go back and self-correct its mistakes and think through much more complex and harder problems than we've been able to address in the past with the GPT series of models. It'll take some time for people to really know how to harness this power. And so I can't tell you right now what the most impactful use case of this is, but we anticipate that it'll be in places like mathematics or in coding. It's particularly good at that. Perhaps in the future in medical research or other scientific fields. But all of that innovation is also yet to come. And as all these models and all these innovations enter the world, we believe the governance models also need to evolve alongside all of the models. And they need to be based in the science that is driving AI innovation. Because we want the governance models to be durable. In order for them to be durable, they need to match where the science is going. And we always believe that it's important to build safety in at multiple layers of the stack. And so for us, we believe that starts as early as in training data, where you use filters to sort out content that is perhaps violative of your policies, to all the way to post-training, where you do rigorous red teaming and evaluations before you release a model. We have a preparedness framework by which we assess all of our models that we're going to release, and then we put out system cards that explain the safety measurements and then the measurements, the assessments against that preparedness framework. And then we also think that post-deployment, there needs to be a really strong monitoring and feedback cycle that goes back into the development of future models. So really, it needs to be at all of these levels. It also needs to be something that is harmonized and involves the cooperation of multiple stakeholders. Because we really believe that government has an incredibly important role to play, but so does civil society, so do the AI safety institutes, so do research labs. Everybody has their part to play in all of this. So we're really supportive of efforts by, for example, the US AI Safety Institute and the UK ones, which we recently signed MOUs with, to really do more research in the testing and evaluation space. But all of that is to say that this innovation, it's incredibly exciting. Sometimes I talk about it as entering the age of intelligence. It's the age where there's going to be all kinds of breakthroughs, things that we never thought was possible before. And some of those things are already starting to happen here in Singapore. There's lots of doctors who are using AI technology here to help with diagnostics. There are companies that are using AI here to improve productivity. And there are a lot of students who are using it to teach themselves new things they've never been able to teach themselves before. And I think all of that is incredibly invigorating. And so I'll just wrap up the journey by saying that really, we're at the recipe formation stage, and if people have ideas for what else would make this a tastier dish, a spicier meal, please, please. I think everybody's thoughts are super important, and everybody has a role to play in this dish that we're all coming up with. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Cooking, recipe, we don't need more reminders that this is happening during lunchtime. Thank you for sharing with us and giving us a sneak peek into current and also emerging applications of the AI technology. So far, I think when we talk about the anxieties and fears that have been expressed on AI technology, they generally fall into use risks and model risks. I think your comment on building safety into the innovation kind of shed light into OpenAI's approach to that. So I look forward, to hearing from the audience if you have any follow-up questions or comments. Now, I'd like to bring the conversation to you, Jamie. So now AI is making its mark in many, many different industries, like what Sandy has just mentioned, right? Media, for one, is one of the industries that's being impacted by AI. I co-direct the Asia Journalism Fellowship, and at a gathering of more than 170 journalists and editors just here last month, there were many expressions of concerns and fears about the impact of AI on journalism and media. Some of them have even talked about whether or not it's possible for AI to eventually replace journalists in newsrooms. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on some of these anxieties and fears. Are they exaggerated? And can you share with us your observations of the actual impact of AI on the media industry currently and your key lessons learned from the Straits Times?
Thanks, Carol. First, I will start by thanking the school for inviting me back here. I'm a proud alumnus of the LKY SPP, so thank you very much. I was class of 2006, the last bunch of people who were at Heng Wee Keng Terrace. So for those of you who are here, appreciate your campus here as much as you can. In terms of Carol's questions, yeah, but maybe to just also frame the concerns that she may have heard from journalists and journalists do have. I need to also explain what the overall environment is that the news media faces, because it is all within a certain context. And I'll have to be very honest. AI is probably just one of the many sort of examples of an industry which is in constant flux. Whether it is revenue, everyone knows that the industry is struggling with finding new ways of financing itself. In terms of readership, everyone knows as well the competition for time that the news media faces with all the other options that are out there for other people. And finally, relevance, right? Increasingly, the news media and journalists have to find their way to find an even greater relevance to our societies today, especially in the face of things like AI. So all these put together, when you have journalists, therefore, as you say, Carol, they get together. With these in mind, plus a still undercooked, not yet cooked AI, which, again, because it's undercooked and not yet cooked, also there are sort of potentially premature fears, does create a certain anxiety within the industry. I won't underestimate that. And I'll give an example. Obviously, opportunities and dangers. So about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, thereabouts, us journalists, we attend all sorts of conferences with our counterparts. And we had a colleague from one of the Western publications, and they were quite sort of forward-looking and forward-leaning in terms of how they use generative AI. And this guy was showing us slides and the actual tools whereby they had developed by themselves quite easily, could trawl social media, could trawl whatever's happening and being chatted around and what's trending on social media. This tool trawled firstly, and then they let it run overnight. Not only does it trawl, it sort of synthesizes, it sort of writes its headlines, and then eventually published. Overnight, without any human intervention, they had the capabilities already quite long ago to be able to do that. So obviously, for those of you who know sort of the Terminator sort of terminologies, this was like the Cyberdyne Skynet moment when journalists were like, oh, wow, okay, I mean, without doing anything, this is a system which is able to quite reasonably now take over the jobs of journalists, and at least those journalists whose jobs sort of revolved around that kind of content. Thankfully, I think that particular publication decided to pull back a little bit and decided that actually we still want that degree of human intervention before Skynet was allowed to publish itself. So that's just one tool, right? And that is something that journalists and newsrooms will have to grapple with. As to whether it is, and all of us currently have the capability of developing our own tools. The Straits Times has those as well. So for those of you who will be in the PR business, yes, your press releases can go in and write themselves, can write themselves pretty well. We've developed our own capabilities to do that, but because it's undercooked, there is still some degree of human intervention that's needed to sort of make it just a little bit better. But we're all prepared for the day when it gets better and better, it learns to a certain degree, and that's where we'll have to find new ways to get over those challenges. The other issue which we'll have to think about is, again, this is one of the core questions that journalists and the news always has, is how do we value our work? How does society value our work? And especially when it comes to the work that journalists have done in the past and will continue to do, especially when they're used to train large language models, and which everyone knows is the core of the work of generative AI. We've seen how this has evolved in various instances. Sandy would be well aware. There was one model where the NYT would take with some of its other counterparts. There's another model where Axel Springer and others will work slightly more collaboratively and cooperatively. There is still, again, no one-size-fits-all. I think that's where us all as stakeholders will, with the help perhaps of the government, find a way to build the kinds of frameworks and rules of engagement that will bring us to the next stage of development of AI. So one of the biggest things, therefore, I mean, newsrooms and everyone else will help work with stakeholders in developing the next stages of development of AI. But within journalism, I feel, honestly speaking, the core of what we need to do needs to come out far better in terms of whether it's in dealing with misinformation and disinformation. How do we explain what journalism actually is. Because in an age of AI, in an age of alternatives, in an age of misinformation, the gap between how you explain yourself and what people know of work of journalists and what is out there in form of AI-created material is going to shrink. And at some point, no one will know. And journalists, by default, aren't very good at explaining themselves. We've always been of the ilk that, we are never going to be the news. We don't need to explain how we do our work. But I think increasingly, we do need to open ourselves up to explain what journalism actually means, right? What do we mean when we verify? What do we mean even if we use AI to verify AI-generated content or misinformation? And that is a lot. That takes a lot of cultural change. And in this stage where I think, as we said, AI is still slightly not yet fully cooked, we as journalists and newsrooms need to come out much better and much stronger in explaining what journalism actually is. What's the value that we add to the human part of our work? Because at the end of the day, I think we do need to bring that far better and more publicly and more accessibly just what the human element is. Because if it's all AI generated, if it's all automated, I think the value of the work of journalists will just diminish over time. So whether it is in what we do as journalists, the kinds of stories that we do as journalists, how we do it, and finally, that element that distinguishes us has to be far better explained. And that's something that at least the Straits Times will have to be focused on, in addition to harnessing the technology that will just evolve in time with AI.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for the rallying call to emphasize and bring everybody's attention back to the human part of tech development and tech innovation. Eunice, Google has also been very active when it comes to AI innovation. In addition, it has also been doing a fair bit of work in helping different industries, including media, adopt the technology. What is Google's approach to AI, and how does it work with different stakeholders to reap the benefits of the AI technology?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for inviting me again to this session. I think I want to take 2 steps back as well to really explain why this moment and why this is such a pivotal, exciting moment. People on this panel have said that AI is really not new, right? So we've been doing AI for a long time. Google as a company has been doing AI for a long time. If you've used Gmail, if you've used search, if you've used Maps, you've been using AI for a long time. We've invested a lot in research, fundamental research, breakthrough research, such as the transformer architecture that's really undergirding a lot of the LLM technology that you see today. But AI, so I think my fundamental point is that AI is more than chatbots. I mean, the chatbot narrative has almost like sort of dominated people's imaginations these days. But AI has been around, AI has been used, and AI, for me, the most exciting application of AI, I don't know if you've heard of this thing called AlphaFold. AlphaFold is basically a Google DeepMind project where they mapped about 200 million proteins, the 3D patterns of 200 million proteins in the human body. It used to take one PhD student, one PhD's worth of time to map one protein. AlphaFold mapped this in a matter of weeks, 200 million proteins. And you can think of that as, what does this mean? What does this mean for understanding diseases? What does this mean for coming up with cancer treatments? What does this mean for personalized medicine, right? What does this mean for proteins, plastics? When you break down plastics, right, you need to understand the protein structures. So I have a 5-year-old daughter, right? So I'm very excited. I think for me, this is way more important in terms of how our lives would change, how human life will change in the future, and how a really important moment that we have here to get this right? Because as we've heard, there are many concerns, there are risks that AI introduces into society, and I think we need to be upfront and acknowledge that these new risks have been introduced with this technology, with concerns on misinformation, deep fakes, concerns on job losses, job transitions. How do we reinvent jobs, right? Like in media. So these are very real concerns. And the way that we've been thinking about it, I can speak a little bit about the industry sort of approach to this, is yes, I think AI regulation governance is really important. We think what Singapore is doing in a very targeted manner, in a very informed manner is really exemplary. Given I speak to many governments around the region, and I think Singapore really stands out. But from the industry perspective, like at least from Google's perspective, we believe that we can be bold, we can seize this moment, but we can also be responsible at the same time. And how are we doing this? Jamie has his 3 Rs, I have my 3 Ps, right? So my 3 Ps are really product, policy, and partnerships. So on product, technical solutions, so watermarking solutions, we have this thing called SynthID, which is basically an invisible watermark that we put into AI-generated first-party products that we generate through Gemini. Whether it's text or video or image, it's there, and you're able to detect that. We have made YouTube creators add labels to their videos to say that, I have realistic synthetic content in my video. And you have to be aware. So it's about giving people the context to make decisions about what they're seeing, because you cannot control everything. Second is really policy, right? So when we put out products, when we roll out products, we have generative AI prohibited policies where anything that when our products are used to mislead, misinform the public, it contravenes these policies. YouTube has community guidelines that has been there for a long, long time, whether it's AI generated or not. If it's meant to cause harm, if it's meant to incite hate, these things have to be removed, right? So, and then the third is really partnerships, which is bringing back the point that Carol made. I think Google, we have been thinking very hard about how do we meaningfully partner with industry and come up with ways, to reinvent, like what SMN said, right? Like how do we reinvent industries together in a way that makes sense for everybody. So we have partnered with SPH, with the Google News Initiative, doing training on misinformation. We have tools like Pinpoint, which allow journalists to use generative AI to trawl through a lot of information and query, like historical records, for example. And then we also have partnerships with government, like the Singapore government with AI Trailblazers, where we have, we bring together public sector organizations and small businesses, private sector organizations. We help them do almost proof of concept projects to see how AI can be used in their individual industries, just to get them to think of things differently and think of how, sort of their industry, their job can coexist with AI, and not, is really about how you adopt that technology in your domain, in your industry. So I'll leave that there. I'm happy to take any questions, but we certainly have a lot more to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice, for sharing Google's 3Ps approach to, to trying to be both bold and responsible. Before I open this discussion to members of the audience, just want to pose the first question to the panelists. We've spoken about some of the measures that's taken to try to mitigate risks that fall under the basket of, say, model risk through safety by design work, for instance, what you mentioned, Sandy, and also Eunice touched briefly on that as well. I would like to maybe talk about specific use risks, right? And certainly one clear instance is manifested in what's happening around the world right now in the context of elections. So according to the World Economic Forum, about 3 billion people will be going to the polls this year and next year. Since the beginning of this year, about 20 over countries have held elections, and tomorrow the Sri Lankans are going to vote. Now, AI technologies bring a host of benefits to elections, right? So, for example, they can make the political campaigning process more efficient. They can automate the more menial tasks freeing politicians, more time to do high-touch kind of campaigning work. And for voters, they can potentially reduce information inequality when AI tools are used to translate election-related information into different languages. This might not be a very big problem for a country like Singapore, but it's particularly significant and beneficial in linguistically diverse countries. Now, however, clearly AI, as we have seen in some instances, also poses significant threats to elections, for instance, due to through hallucinations, and also how it enables certain perpetrators to upscale their production and dissemination of misinformation. So I would like to hear from the panelists in your roles as policymakers and industry leaders. What do you think needs to be done more to safeguard election integrity? Anyone can start.
I've been nominated by the Straits Times, so I have to. Well, I think the front and center in people's minds is the bill that we have tabled around election integrity, which speaks to the issue of misinformation that is AI-driven within the electoral context. And I think the issue of the elections is important. I mean, ultimately, we need trust in the electoral process, and you need trust in the electoral outcome. I think in Singapore we're very privileged that our system is such that there is generally high trust in the process. I think we must be one of the few parliaments in the world where both sides of the house stand up and tell the public, please trust the outcome of the election, trust the process of the election. But the electoral process is not only about the actual act of voting. It is about the information that voters have in order to then make their choices. And that is then the surface area for manipulation. And it is ripe for manipulation with AI-driven tools. So we've taken steps over the last few years, and you'll be familiar, we have legislation around online falsehoods, we have legislation around online criminal harms, foreign interference, harassment. And each of these pieces speaks to a particular balance of private interest and public interest, a particular outcome in terms of shoring up trust and accountability around a particular process, and a particular operational consideration. For this new bill, what is the operational consideration? What is the balance of public interest and private interest? The contrast is often put with respect to POFMA, our Prevention of Online Falsehoods and Misinformation Act. There is a test around public interest and a requirement for an establishment of fact by an authoritative third party. You may have a very strong belief about a vaccine or about a drug or so forth, but ultimately an academic informing the government, Ministry of Health, is then saying this is the public position because that's in the public interest. This is a very, very different process from what will happen in an election, where a candidate themselves can be misrepresented, and we are worried about specifically that, an AI-driven tool to misrepresent a candidate's words, a candidate's actions. And the only person who can then provide that verification that this did not happen, take a stand that this does not happen, is the candidate themselves. The government is in no position to do so. A third party, an academic, a professor, a research institution is in no position to do so. There may be ways in which other organizations may have views, technological views about the material, but did the act happen or not happen is something then that the candidate themselves has an interest in expressing, and then a responsibility to address in terms of providing the electorate the correct information. So this is a very different need that we're trying to address through this bill. But ultimately, the bill and the act, if passed, is about making sure then that we don't go down the route that you can see happening already in certain jurisdictions, where the process of campaigning, the information being provided to the electorate is being cast in very bad terms, is being called into doubt, and levels of trust in the discourse that happens in the public space, level of trust in media institutions, level of trust in platforms that provide information is dropping and falling. So it is, as a piece of legislation, focused around the electoral process. It is, in terms of its operations, focused around the candidate and a declaration and the veracity of that declaration. But it has as its intent the shoring up of public trust in information, discourse, platforms, the media, and that sense of institutions having a responsibility above and beyond their own narrow interests. So that's sort of where we're coming from. Bill hasn't been debated, certainly hasn't been passed, and so we will have to scrub through some of these details and give an accounting to the public of how we will do this, but that is the reason why we are tabling this bill, and that's the direction we feel we need to go. And I think it's useful to take stock over what's happened over the last 3 years, where we have seen in Singapore a series of legislative tools being rolled out, each followed by a fairly robust debate about concerns, very legitimate, we hope answered, and then look at the performance of those legislative tools over time. And I think we are very heartened by the fact that, well, public trust in institutions remains high, but that institutional trust extends well beyond the government into the media, journalism, and the various platforms that people are receiving their information from. And I think that's a necessary precondition for the robust discussions and decision-making and engagement of the public in the electoral process. Long may it continue.
Any other comments? Sandy?
Sure. I can speak a bit about what we've done with regards to elections. So I think that this issue, similar to many other very serious issues, are things that we are trying to address in a multi-pronged approach. So we have tools that are really meant to prevent the use of our product and our services for generating content that could lead to misinformation. So in DALL-E, for example, we have the ability to prevent the creation of images of real people, including candidates, because we recognize that that is a big concern for candidates, especially during electoral season. We also have policies that prevent the use of our tools via API to create impersonation chatbots, or to use our tools for actually campaigning purposes at all, or to dissuade people from participating in the electoral process. So we don't want somebody to create a product that perhaps gives people the wrong impression about where their electoral location is or what the positions of various candidates are, precisely because we believe that it's important that people trust what the candidates are putting out and they're not doubting that perhaps it's coming from a tool that was built on one of our services. So we take this issue very seriously and think that tools and policies are just two of the prongs. In addition to that, there's also the need to cooperate with other actors in the ecosystem to make sure that we are all working together to prevent misinformation, especially during times of election. So things that we've done in that space include, we're on the steering committee for the C2PA organization, which is an organization that works on creating standards for images. And so the way it works is that if there's an image that is created by DALL-E, metadata is attached to it that will tell you that it is an AI-generated image. And we're not the only ones who use this standard. Nikon and other companies, it's a cross-sectoral organization, also use a similar standard for images generated by their tools. And the whole idea is that if we can get a whole multi-sectoral industries to be using the same standard, then over time it'll make it easier for people to understand what is AI generated and what is not. So we took a leadership role in the steering committee in order to be able to help advance adoption and development of these standards. In addition to that, we're trying to go beyond just that and create our own classifiers so that you can tell when something is created specifically by DALL-E. And the reason we're doing this is because this version of it is a lot more resistant to modification, because we realize that sometimes people take an image and they crop it, or they take a screenshot of it and it becomes more difficult. But with our classifier that we're trying to build, this one will be more resistant to modification. So if you crop the image, you can still tell that it was made by DALL-E, for example. And so it's really just multiple ways that we're trying to attack this problem, because we realize that it is a very serious concern that undermines not just trust in the democratic process, but trust in innovation, trust in society, and social cohesion overall. So.
Thank you. If there are no any further comments, I would like to open this discussion. Yes, if you could just maybe say your name and where you're from before you ask your question, we will appreciate it. Thank
Hi,
you.
I'm Esther. I'm here on a personal basis, but I'm with GovTech, and I've been a technical person, since young. And I have a question on for SMS Janiel. Thanks for giving a very comprehensive rundown on the policy toolbox that the government has in the AI space. So in my question, I'd like to draw a parallel with our approach towards healthcare for our people, especially for the aging population. Because in the healthcare space, right, Singapore is well advanced. When people were talking about longevity, living well, living more good years, or more years, right? Singapore has already studied into aging well, so quality of life versus number of years you live. So what's the next stage or focal area in terms of the government's prerogative on AI governance, if we think about this? And how are we keeping ahead in the AI space, as we have done in healthcare? Like, what's keeping you awake? And while we guard our social space and our needs of our people. Yeah.
I think to imagine the next bound of AI, well, you don't know that it's AI. And actually, we don't know what we will need in order to then be a significant player in whatever the next bound of technology is. As Sandy put it, we're building the recipes, we're collaborating, we have to have in place a certain set of platforms, mechanisms and tools that will give us the agility and the confidence that we'll be able to pivot in the future. Some of that's infrastructure. So the compute that we're trying to bring in and develop, the data centers that we're making available, the energy sources for those data centers, the subsea connectivity, all of those, well, if it turns out that chatbot-based AIs are the way to go, they'll be useful. If it turns out that some other form of AI or some other technological-based platform that requires us to share information with the rest of the world is going to be the next big thing, the infrastructure will still be useful. And so the same applies then to the sort of talent development strategies that we have. Not many years ago, there was some discussion about whether we should make every child in school learn how to code. And there was a lot of back and forth. And some of the arguments made were, well, you don't really know what it is that which coding language that they need to learn. And then there were some arguments of, well, maybe they may not even need to learn how to code, they may well need to use machine-derived code and learn how to apply it. And so the approach that we took was, well, get the fundamentals right. Make sure that mathematics standards are high, critical reasoning, computational thinking, logic, all of these, regardless of which coding language, which technological platform, which disruptive information-based technology is going to be used, will be useful, not necessarily from a plug-and-play approach, but for that individual then to retrain, reskill, and learn the skills at the appropriate time in their lives. Similarly, from a governance perspective, we need a similar approach where we have centers of excellence and that we have places both within the public sector, in the private sector, in academia, where we are actively developing the technical skills, but we also have a regulatory approach and a funding approach that allows quite a lot of innovation and self-discovery amongst the market. And we think we have that type of approach here in Singapore, and we apply it not just to AI, but if you look, let's say, at an adjacent field, cybersecurity. This is also a field in which we are applying the same sort of approach, that you need a center of excellence within government, you need academic centers where the researchers are working very well in this, and then the conditions for the private sector to drive quite a lot of innovation, and a very tight-knit community to drive best practices around the ecosystem. So I think the short version is that we don't have a crystal ball. We need to appreciate that we are now very close to the frontier and the forefront, plugged in as we are to many things that are happening around the world. And so with that uncertainty, a focus on some of the fundamental enablers for agility and repurposing of talent, of manpower, of land, of capital, of energy, and of infrastructure is going to be a key enabler for us to then deal with whatever is the new technology that becomes the big thing a few years hence.
The lady, and then after that, the gentleman here in black. We'll start with you.
Hi, sorry. My name is Celine. I'm also here on a personal basis, and I'm a current undergraduate at Oxford reading PPE. My question was because the title is AI and governance, and I was thinking, because when we discuss AI right now, we often think about it in a STEM perspective, like for instance, example about mapping 200 million proteins. Is there a possibility that one day AI can be our policymakers? Because as we know, it has very high-end analytical capabilities, and as Ms. Sandy just mentioned, now it also has reasoning capabilities. Will it be possible that AI can replace policymakers in analyzing social issues and creating policy plans for us? And what are our stances on, is it ethical, is it acceptable, is it a possibility? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very provocative question. I wouldn't ask the policymaker to answer first, but maybe we can take the question together from this gentleman, and we can, take the questions together.
Hi, my name's Haris. I'm a Master's in International Affairs student here at the Lee Kuan Yew School. My question is, based on the discussion today, like we heard that tech companies and AI companies have these strict standards and restrictions on what their tools can be used for. But oftentimes I find when using these tools that the misinformation is driven by hallucinations within the algorithm itself. And I was wondering what's like the take between the companies on who the liability, and government and businesses that are using these AI products, on where the liability then lies on when such hallucinations or unintended misinformation occurs.
Maybe we can hear from, say, Eunice and Sandy on the question pertaining to misinformation that's driven by algorithm. Because both of you kind of talked about the processes that's put in place, alluded to it at the least, to kind of safeguard the integrity, right, of information. So maybe you can hear from you on that. And of course, if you have thoughts, since you have a close eye on the innovation of AI, you can also perhaps answer that big question from Esther, if AI can ever replace policymakers, and then hope to hear also from you, Jamie, your thoughts perhaps on that, and we can have some maybe reflections on that from the policymaker himself. So Eunice and then Sandy.
So I think on the question of liability, to be very honest, this is still something that I would say most jurisdictions have not clearly landed on. What we, as Google, I think our approach is that there's a shared responsibility across the ecosystem. So what must AI developers do to make sure that you do sufficient red teaming, internal and external red teaming before you launch products? Do you test it enough? Do you test it with the right users? Because I think whatever you do in the lab, when you put it out in the real world, it may be very different. It may behave very, very differently. So how do you like what Sandy said, have that kind of feedback loop, right? Like when new issues are detected, how do you incorporate that kind of feedback and then improve your models on that? And then as the deployer of the system, so the stack, where say Google develops models, but sometimes these models are used by a company to develop their own product, right? And then they train it further with their own proprietary information, whether it's like a healthcare information or whatever. Then who takes responsibility, right? So and then at the end user phase as well, if we have these policies, or like you have a contract with your deployer, with your supplier, and you go against this contract, where does the liability lie? So TLDR is, I think, is still to be worked out on exact legal liability, but we do think that that there is a shared responsibility that needs to be sort of proportionate along that ecosystem. On the second question, on the question of AI replacing policymakers, so the way I like to think about it is, in every job there are like multiple tasks that you have to do, right? So in my day-to-day job, I speak to you guys, but I also write papers. I also do certain other things. And maybe AI can replace certain tasks that policymakers do, like, they can collate information, but there's also a very human element to policymaking, which is what, sort of also the same in journalism, right? Where you have to interact with the public. My guess is that I don't think AI is going to be able to replace all the tasks in a given job. Maybe certain tasks that makes you more efficient, more productive, able to take away the drudgery, right? Like of like just research, and allow you that time for policymakers actually to devote to more human, more meaningful, more higher value add type of work on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
On the question about hallucinations, I think, as Eunice said, I think we do think that it's a live issue that is currently in debate at the moment. How do we address this issue? From our perspective, we're trying to actually build our technology to really reduce hallucinations, because the O1 series of models that just went out, that one actually on our benchmarks performs significantly better on hallucinations than our previous models. It's not perfect. We realize that it's not perfect, but we're constantly in this iterative phase of trying to innovate as quickly as we can in the space, because we realize that it is one of the biggest things that does put trust at risk in terms of people using our technologies. And I think the thing that is really amazing about O1 is not only are we developing it so that it produces less hallucinations, but we're actually using it to help with model development so that future models have less hallucinations as well. And the reason we can do this is because of its reasoning capabilities, because now we can teach the model not just what policies it has to follow, but why it has to follow those policies as well, which is a paradigm we couldn't do before. And so as we continue to innovate in this space, we'll just continue to find new ways to really try to grapple with this problem. And then just a quick word on the AI policymaker question, which I think is a really interesting one. I think every single person up here is either currently in government or formerly in government, including myself and my other fellow panelists. So I think we would all be in agreement with the idea that you can't replace the human element of what Eunice was saying solely with technology. It'll very much augment what people do, similar to the way calculators and computers have all augmented the way people work these days, but it doesn't actually replace the role of people in policy making or in governance or in the government at all.
If I go to that very same question, I mean, indeed, I'm glad you asked it, because it's a question I asked myself, and within the newsroom, journalists are usually kind of pessimistic people, and we do ask, as I said in my remarks, we do ask ourselves every day, what are the things that we do that can be replaced? And if you can replace journalists and journalism, you can replace policy and policymakers. And if you draw a straight line, indeed, that is indeed the possibility. You can write policy, and I would say you could even write legislation. Who knows, AI can probably write clearer legislation sometimes. But I think whether or not we get there, the imperative really is that we need to assume that it will. Because when we assume that it will, then it forces us earlier to reckon with it and to recognize that we do need to take this time to crystallize what it is that we do as humans, as the value add, that is always going to be different, because you cannot always assume that it will be. And I cannot sit on to say that yes, there will always be a human element. I need to identify what it actually is. And that will be a very iterative process. It will be a kind of scary process, but at least it forces us back to really the basics of what we do. And I'm sure the policymakers are doing that as well. And what really is the human part of policymakers, because AI can listen, it can learn, it can relearn, it can unlearn, it can do everything else. So we definitely are going through a period of introspection. I'm sure I am, but I'll leave the final answer to Janil as to how far they are thinking about that.
I don't know that I have the finalized answer. The issue of the hallucinations and the performance of the different models, actually there is a link between the two questions, which I might try to draw out a little bit. Today, the issue of hallucinations, I think in some people's minds, is something for the model makers to solve. and that's not wrong. I mean, I don't disagree, and I mean, they are indeed paying attention to that. But if you look at the second-order deployment of the models and how people are embedding LLM and generative AI tools into their workflow and into their products, what's happening is that people are taking the outputs and then testing it against other types of algorithms, or, for example, even search older tech, such as a Google search. And you're embedding different aspects of digitalization tools to test against each other and verify against each other, and then you have an increasing level of confidence in the output. And so the process through which you derive your information, understanding that there is a hallucination rate, or in some sort of matrices of thinking, you think about a sensitivity or specificity, false positives, false negatives. Understanding how that process works, you can bring to bear a variety of tools to then reduce your error or increase your confidence. What's this got to do with AI and policymaking? Well, I'll come to that. This is a little bit of a long-winded explanation. The first point about AI and policymaking is, of course, that it's already being used in policymaking. So today we have PAIR, which is a product that GovTech supports within the government space, and which is essentially an LLM-based product for public officers to use generative AI in searching out information, rewriting. I'm sure some of my speeches are written using generative AI, but then ultimately the officer takes responsibility for it. So whether it's on the research, synthesizing material, criticizing or correcting material, AI and generative AI and large language models are already being used as part of policy making. But there, as Jamie has said, there is a line that you can draw, but there is a point at which you need a humanistic touch today. Because part of policy making requires a certain theory of mind. It requires a certain imagination. You need to be able to say, if we do this, if I say this, what will people think? Not just what are the facts, not just what is the math and what is the algorithm, but there has to be a consideration of how will people then behave? How will then this be received? A theory of mind. It's an important part of politics, and it's an important part of policy making. And that requires a sense of imagination, right? You need to imagine that, well, instead of a carbon tax of $5, I could table a carbon tax of $40 or $50 or whatever it is. It will be received in such a way, and we can take the conversation forward. Not just on the basis of what the math is today or what the business consideration is today, but how people anticipate their future. So now, just not a theory of mind, but a second and third order theory of mind, a sense of imagination. You need to be able to say, well, you have a medical insurance, a medical savings product, which is on the basis of each individual saving, what we had old MediSave and MediShield, and then imagine that our society is ready for something like MediShield Life, universal medical insurance coverage as an insurance product, cohort-based. And that's a leap of faith that requires an understanding of society and how society responds. What has that got to do with the question the gentleman asked? Well, it's because today, the way in which AI hallucinates is seen as a problem to be fixed. But at some point, if you can have an AI where the sense of imagination and theory of mind suggests that that is a useful thing, in other words, that they are drawing inferences which the public then subsequently trusts. They are creating positions and synthesizing knowledge in a way that we don't then say derisively is a hallucination, but is a synthesis which is then useful for us, which speaks to that idea of imagination, a theory of mind, what could be better. Then you run the possibility of then finally closing the gap. We don't see that on the horizon. I don't see that on the horizon. Maybe behind closed doors, I don't know if OpenAI sees that on the horizon, but that's the delta that you would need to cross to then answer the first question, which is how far you'd have to go to be able to then have a full AI-based or technological-based policy making. And I think for now, we still have a human role. There are jobs out there. We're not going to be entirely replaced. But there I think is a link between those considerations.
Thank you very much. Well, okay. We are 10 minutes past time. We'll take the last round. I think I see 2 questions. So keep your questions short, and we'll try to keep the responses short as well. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I will go ahead. I'm Yang Xin Han from Master in Public Policy from the Guangyao Public Policy School. And my question is actually the chief of United Nations back to the idea of setting a global AI watchdog like nuclear and agency before in 2023. But actually this agency haven't set it until now. It is the mid-2024. So I want to know, from the private sector, also from the public sector, what's your opinion? Is there really an urgent demand for AI agency worldwide now, considering the development of AI at this time, and also to what extent do you think this kind of the international organization, if we set a organization related to AI, will effectively work in the current development status of AI application? And yeah, just a concern, what's your opinion on this problem? Thanks.
Hello, my name is Zhengming Huang. I'm a PhD student here. Now I want to ask a question. The training of AI models requires high quality data. How is data quality currently ensured, and are there any challenges in cross-departmental data sharing? That's all. Thank you.
Okay. So, quality of data sharing, in developing the models. Perhaps either Eunice or Sandy would like to comment quickly on that. And then, of course, the question on the relevance of an international AI agency. Janil? Yeah, okay.
Also can speak to the... Okay. On data quality, maybe I'll just address that. So I think the majority of LLMs that companies are putting out are trained on the open web, and a lot of the secret sauce is actually in sort of cleaning up the data, the algorithms. So we have certain standards internally on data quality. Having really good curated data sets for evaluations as well. And in terms of data sharing, I think, we have been very, how do I say this? We have been for a long time invested in sort of sharing open data sets through many platforms. One is this thing called Data Commons, where we basically have curated data sets from governments all over the world on, weather data or data on economic growth and development. And we've put them all together. We've cleaned them all up. We put them in a searchable database where that's now used by the UN, where people can ask questions and compare across countries. So we have been also very open in sharing our research, like what I mentioned earlier in my opening, that a lot of our fundamental breakthrough research has been open sourced. So we have been sort of very, very invested in both the open source system as well. Android, as a company, I think Android, Chrome, these are all open source platforms as well. So in, I think in totality, we have, as model developers, both open and proprietary models like Gemini, but we also have open models like Gemma. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's a smaller model that we put out last year. So yeah, we've had a long history of sort of contributing to the open source community and the open ecosystem. On the second question on international AI agency, so yesterday, like what SMS said, the UN high-level advisory body released their report, and that was not one of the recommendations to form a new international AI agency. I think despite all of that, things things don't always have to be done in a form of a new agency. There are many, many issues with international organizations that may not actually be the most effective way of solving problems. You can ask Jamie about the World Trade Organization later. We both served there. So, but I just wanted to draw your attention to things like the AI safety summits that have been hosted, by the UK last year, by Korea this year, and by the French next year, where we're basically trying to come together as government, industry, civil society to talk about AI safety, to talk about AI safety standards. And this kind of standard setting is also done in international standards bodies like the ISO. So a lot of international coordination can be done without the need for a new international organization to be set up, because that entails a lot of investment, a lot of sort of administrative things, and then the politics of it also gets in the way.
Since Eunice sort of fingered me for it, yeah, the reason why we were sniggering is because we both represented our countries to the WTO at different times, and I also had the privilege or the pain of representing the country where it relates to climate change. So I have some experience there. I agree with Eunice. I mean, instinctively, yes, most people will feel that there is there's 100% need for international collaboration and cooperation. We are probably on the road there in terms of AI, but whether or not the formal structure of an agency is going to help, I seriously doubt it, based upon the experiences that we've seen in recent years. And as Janil just said, people need to agree to be part of it. And an agency is only worth its salt if it's able to enforce certain things. And if no one's going to be agreeing to be enforced or have things enforced upon them, then it's really pointless. So, but I think that does not detract from the fact that I think we all can do much better in terms of international collaboration and cooperation, whether it's in smaller groups or in plurilateral or whatever other types of formats. I think the time is probably right for that right now.
I was going to say that on the international cooperation piece, one thing that we do find quite encouraging was the announcement at the Korea Safety Institute, or not Safety Institute, the Korea AI Summit a few months ago, where there was an announcement of the AI Safety Institutes working together, because I think that that is going to be particularly important moving forward to make sure that there's proper information sharing, incident reporting, catastrophic risk mitigation, all kinds of things that, with that technical knowledge that's embedded in a lot of AI safety institutes, will become particularly important as model capabilities advance. On the data question, I'd say that for quality of data, for us that's particularly important, and we have a number of different ways that we try to ensure the quality of our data. We definitely have filters and classifiers. We actually apply our own moderation classifier to our own data sets to make sure that we filter out anything that might be violative of our policies to begin with, because that improves the quality of the data so that we don't end up with violative content on the output side. So we try to do that. We try to remove PII from our data sets as well. And then there's obviously a lot of proprietary measures that go into structuring the data sets. But in addition to data, I think something that's also really interesting is what you do with the data sets. It's about training techniques. It's about just trying to push the frontier on how LLMs are developed. And I think that that is a really interesting area of innovation that you should probably keep your eye on.
I think on the two specific questions, I don't have anything to add from what my colleagues on the panel have said, and I quite agree. I just want to say thank you all very much for a wide variety of questions and for inviting us to share our thoughts in a very interesting dialogue and a discussion. And I think it highlights where the discussion around AI and AI governance has developed to. We're well past the breathless hyperbole, the misinformed scare and anxiety. We've gotten down to some of the granular details about what's technically necessary, what's happening in the policy space, that this is something not necessarily for government to solve on its own or for the industry to then innovate on its own, that actually government needs to have innovative capability, industry needs to then participate in the development of the regulatory space and inform the various multilateral and bilateral fora that we have internationally, and that this is something that we need to do globally. It cannot just be Singapore or we just settle our own domestic issues. Actually, the benefit comes for us if we can do this on a very wide canvas across a number of domains and across the borders. So the discussion and the questions that we've had today are very heartening, and I think it speaks to the maturity of our discussion in this space and the stakeholders that we've been able to energize and bring together around some of these issues. So thank you all very much for inviting me to speak about one of my favorite subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your not just attention, but your participation. I think we have done more than addressing the topic of AI governance in the age of disinformation. I was prepared to do a quick summary of the discussions, but no need because Dr. Janil has just done it. So thank you very much. And please join me in thanking my 4 panelists.